Many thanks for staying with us on Report Desk Africa. Now, very quickly, we're going to go into our second conversation for today, which is centered around press freedom. Now, the calls for press freedom across the world, but particularly in Africa, are getting even louder. In many countries, the voice of the media is being stifled, thus limiting the amount of information that is made available. This year, the United Nations is pushing for freedom of the press to be the drive of all other human rights and to aid democracy worldwide. Now, in this report, News Central's Bernard Akede, who is also my co-anchor, explores the challenges faced by journalists across, he's blushing by the way, explores the challenges that are faced by journalists across the African continent. Do take a look.
The abduction and eventual murder of the renowned Cameroonian journalist and radio host Martinez Zogo in January 2023 once again brought to the fore questions about press freedom, particularly in Africa. Zogo was outspoken against graft and financial sleaze and had often faced threats over his work. Such threats from powerful individuals, organizations, and even sometimes governments have put gags on certain journalists and media houses, restricting their freedom to do proper journalistic work.
I'm pressed now. Look at it. I'm walking now. I'm pressed. So what? I am pressed. Why don't
press freedom for me means the absence of censorship and the ability to have editorial independence, to have a newsroom that is free of external interference.
Unfortunately, despite the rhetoric and whatever we say, there's hardly press freedom anywhere in the world.
Reporters, editors, and photographers have often put their lives on the line to reveal the truth behind significant events, but are sometimes faced with challenges in telling their stories. The popular saying, "He who pays the piper calls the tune," is oftentimes one of such challenges faced.
The bulk of advertising money comes from politics, it comes from government, and then the next thing it comes from telcos and multinationals, and some of these businesses are heavily invested in government patronage. So that is one of the problems we're facing. But then again, we can also separate it. If we crack the funding problem in African media or in Nigerian media, we definitely will go a long way in terms of press freedom.
Even new media has not been spared. Several countries, especially in Africa, have at some point witnessed a partial or total shutdown of social media, an act that has further limited the freedom of the press.
Social media has provided, a platform for the average citizen to voice out, and speak about what the issues are. In terms of regulation, in terms of fake news, we already have regulations. We already have policies, to check against this thing. That's why we have libel laws. That's why we have defamation laws. That's why we have media organizations who are acting as fact checkers.
For it to work well in the media space, there has to be, I think, two major things. One, a willingness on the part of the leadership of a country or a society to understand that even though they might get some rebuke in the telling of a story, when that story is true, the bigger picture is such that there is an incentive for progress.
The 30th anniversary of World Press Freedom Day, celebrated this year, emphasizes the crucial role of press freedom and independence and diverse media as fundamental to the enjoyment of all human rights.
On this and every World Press Freedom Day, the world must speak with one voice. Stop the threats and attacks. Stop detaining and imprisoning journalists for doing their jobs. Stop the lies and disinformation. Stop targeting truth and truth tellers. As journalists stand up for truth, the world stands up with them.
The press, which is considered the fourth pillar of democracy, is essential for the maintenance of balance and reporting issues that concern global citizens.
Of course, now this one is our very own topic, so we do not need any encyclopedia to join this. These are things that we've experienced ourselves. And of course, joining us to discuss this are News Central correspondents themselves. One of them, of course, Adesewa Odusoga, and the other Niyi Omoniyi. And all four of us at one stage or one point in the time of our career have experienced press, or would I say the lack of press freedom, so to speak. So
it's time for us to sink our phalanges, like I like to say, into this meat called press freedom, or the lack of it.
Ben,
right.
please quickly answer this for me.
Okay.
Why were you running in that report? What
what
were you running from?
Also, I was going to explain, now that report, actually, I remember quite clearly, was just immediately, the recently concluded general elections, and that was Kano, northern Nigeria. Now, some police officers who I would call overzealous were trying to create awareness in the area because they heard that there was some external aggression coming. So it actually began to shoot live bullets around there. And then the fire truck, if you can see, was spraying water from the water cannon as well. I wasn't running from the police. I was running from the water because I was shooting with my phone, and I didn't want my phone to get wet. To be honest,
yeah,
I was running.
You were running from the live bullet, and if I'm taking it from what this one of the man you used in this particular report was mentioning, that sometimes we face some of these dangers in these places, but the incentive pays off. So my question is, what is the incentive from that particular report, from that particular place you went for?
I'll be honest with you, Niyi. For me, the incentive was the fact that we are able, and this is always what comes up for me, that we are able to tell true stories the way they are and not have people twist and turn the story and then publish something different. Like I clearly stated, now from that video, I didn't even notice initially because that clip was cut out from a very long clip. One would have thought, oh, that journalist is running away from the police who was holding a gun. No. I was actually running from the water that was sprayed from that water cannon. I didn't know if it was hot, if it was cold, if it was mixed with pepper or yam water or whatever it was, but I just didn't want the water to touch me. You know, that's why I was running. So again, like I said, the incentive is the fact that, and I like the way Shewa is laughing to this. Shewa, we're going to put you out there next.
The water was far away from you. Is the bullets were running?
You have no idea how far that water cannon was shooting. But to be honest, first of all, guys, now this is 2023. Where exactly are we on press freedom in Nigeria and generally in Africa? And Shewa, I was saying I like the way you're smiling, but I want you to talk about this first of all, because we know that the mouth of the press is still gagged in many parts of Africa.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm going to take the phrase that was used in your report. It says, "He who pays the piper dictates the tune." And you'd agree with me that I'll speak for Africa. In many African countries, the government pays the piper, and that's we journalists. And then, of course, in turn, they dictate the tune for us. So we have seen it in so many African countries that you find it very hard to get information. You find it very hard to report the true stories. It's quite, I mean, there's no transparency. And so in a place where there are no transparencies, you do not expect journalists to perform magic in these places. And then, of course, a lot of us have been victims of, these oppressions against journalists. So I always say things like, many times journalists report stories about, gender-based violence, a lot of stories, human rights, freedom of this and that. But who defends the journalists in this time? I know that we have been, for example, the United Nations having a day's Press Freedom Day. It's not enough. And then we know that even journalists keep talking about these things, raising the volume about how much journalists are being oppressed. But are there other people fighting for journalists the way journalists do for other people in the society? And the answer is no, because you understand that the government who should be at the forefront of this particular fight are the perpetrators of this particular offenses. And we see that also private bodies are also beginning to hamper the press freedom, because this is not just about government alone. If you agree with me that, for example, Nigeria, you realize the ownership of some media stations, you could see directly reflects in the kind of reportage that they pull out from the particular media stations. So, for example, some Nigerian stations that are owned by, let's say, a particular politician, you could tell that they are not allowed to speak against a particular political party or the role of the government of the day. So that could tell you that he who pays the piper indeed dictates the tune in this case.
So I don't want to interrupt you, but it goes beyond even just Nigerian media outfits too. We see this happen almost across the entire world. I mean, in America, we have we have CNN, we have Fox, and then they have the way they tell their own news. We have the BBC of the UK, not exactly speaking against the government. So I think press freedom, or the lack of press freedom, is actually a global phenomenon when we're looking at he who pays the piper dictating the tune.
Yeah, And sincerely, I do agree to that, because if you see a Russian media outfit, for example, it will certainly not want to support anything that has to do with the Westerners. And of course, if you see a Western media outfit as well, certainly wouldn't want to publish anything that is speaking positive about whatever it is the Russian media is talking about. And this goes far beyond what Nigeria is. But we are more concerned is if we're saying Nigeria is the giant of Africa, of course, it means it's like the big brother to other African countries. And if Nigeria itself is ranking 123 out of 180, a backslide from what it was years before, and even 2 years or a year before, then it just shows to some of the things that might actually be going wrong. Yeah, there are bright spots in journalism and being the liberalism in terms of the kind of free hand journalists now have now as against what it was back in the military era. It's getting better, but we can't take away the part of independence. And that's where I succumb with what Shewa was speaking to earlier. In terms of independence, we still see, even for the state-owned media outfits, those ones are even a no-no. There are so many things we don't do. We know some of them that even when things are happening in town or happening in the environment that is against the government, they won't even publish it in the first place, not to talk of you trying to get the news about it.
They're basic PR for the government.
Exactly. So it's like a PR tool for the government, and they won't say anything. Cameroon, for example, like the story you mentioned, Martinez Zogo, he was working for an independent radio outfit who was consistently speaking against corruption, picking up bad eggs in the political terrain, and of course letting information out. What happened? He was killed, and according to sources, he was killed right in front of a police station. And that brings me to the fact that where is the rule of law really supporting the affairs of journalists in these cases? Yeah, don't get me wrong. Just as we have overzealous police officers, we have overzealous journalists as well sometimes. And they infringe on their rights. But when a journalist goes out of his way, just, he has broken the law, is jungle justice the right thing? That's where you see someone, okay, because I wrote a story that's against you, or I wrote a story that is actually slander or against the rule of law. It's not in your power to take a police to just go. You need to file a petition, and the person will be charged to court. That should be the normal rule of law. But we've seen all across, even in Africa, not just Nigeria, for example, in Africa or across Africa, these things are still happening. There are places where you can't even say anything as a journalist. They've been so gagged that they can't even publish anything. Stations are being shut down. If it's not a state-owned TV outfit, they are not even operational in some countries still today.
Yeah. You know, still talking about being gagged, right? It is needless to say that with the advent of the digital era, the information landscape has completely changed. And unfortunately, this is supposed to work in our favor as journalists. Journalism, as we know it, is not exactly how it used to be. Now there are citizen journalists. There are people who just pick up their phones and, make stories. But then, still speaking of being gagged, you see that there's so many times that we try to walk on eggshells, because at this point, you don't even know what you can say that will offend somebody. True. You see body slapping sanctions here and there. You say something, your guest says something, it's against you. So it has become really dicey, and it shouldn't be, right? There is also the conversation of journalists not even being respected enough. Now, I'm not saying that the press should abuse the power that they have, but I don't think that the power that the press had in time past still holds water, because you see people who you see pressmen go to cover an event, go to cover an occurrence, and then you see the security personnel harassing both the people there and the press, and you try to tell them. I mean, you saw our correspondent being harassed by one of the security men. Again, like Niyi said, it's not to abuse the power that you have, it's not to be overzealous, but you see people genuinely trying to do their work, and then they're being harassed by security personnel. So at this point, it doesn't even look as if the press has as much power. And then unfortunately, by default, a lot of pressmen, a lot of media organizations have become loyalists, because you can't say or do anything, just like Shewa said, against the people that either own the media station or pay the media station or sponsor, because they're going to slap you with sanctions. So where does that leave us?
So then I think this brings us to the point where we're now asking, like you said, where does that leave us? Where do we draw the line? How do we separate media such that we have free press from those who are paying the bills? Because now we're not just looking at security operatives clamping down on media practitioners, which we have been seeing happening in several countries, including Nigeria, although in some places it's better now. But now we're looking at a different type of control, and that, of course, we talk about financial control. Where can we get it right? How can we get it right?
Bernard, thank you for mentioning the financial control, because I was going to say that when you look at press freedom holistically, it may not just be, security personnel or politicians that are actually hampering on press freedom. When you look at the financial part, we know how media stations survive. They survive on advertisement and all of that. So you realize that in cases where probably a brand, you're trying to get a brand to come to your company to advertise their brand, or even if with their existing customers, you may not be allowed, and there is a story against them. You may not be allowed to tell the story in its true sense, because you might be going against your agreements, and then this can also affect the relationship between the media company and the brand that is financing the company, so to speak. And then, I think this is also an aspect of press freedom that needs to be talked about. Media stations cannot survive without these people. And then you may be, holding back a little bit of information because of the kind of relationship that you have. I remember a situation where I think there was a fire incident about a particular company. I'm not going to be specific. I think that happened with News Central. And then we were supposed to report this story as it is, the fire incident as it is. And then the man was telling me, he said something like, we are about to, have a kind of relationship with you guys. And I know if you go ahead to tell this story, this can affect the relationship, consider the relationship and all that. So he was literally holding us like on chocolate, like, if you do this, we are not going to do that. And if we do that, this can, destroy the relationship. Another thing that I also want to mention is that sometimes I wonder if the cameras that we hold are even much more powerful than guns, because the way security personnel react to, you bringing out your cameras can be very frustrating.
It's like a weapon.
And sometimes there was a time I had to ask, am I holding a gun? It's just cameras. It can't hurt you. I can't even pull the trigger from here. You have something that is even more threatening to my life than I do. I just have a pen and a camera. So why are you so threatened? And then the way they regard journalists can be very annoying. When you cover protests, as little as even doing like a stand-up in the area, you have street urchins coming to harass you, saying that don't film me. If you film me, you're going to put yourself in trouble. So there's a lot of things going. The government is against you. The security personnel are against you. Street urchins, even ordinary people would, the way they would even regard you just by seeing the camera alone. And then I think regular content creators are becoming a threat to journalists, because you would be on the streets trying to make some research and trying to get respondents on the streets. Then somebody says, no, I don't want to talk to you, because if I talk to you, then I'll find myself on Facebook and then somebody's using me for his kids. So all of these things are affecting journalists a lot. And then I think we need a strong regulation on, you cannot just, like Blessings mentioned, we have citizen journalists, but these people to some extent are actually affecting the real work journalists are doing, because nobody knows who is serious and who is not serious.
True. So, but then if we bring in regulation, just as it had happened on social media some time ago, and remember that in Nigeria was one of those countries that experienced ban on some certain platforms like Twitter. If we bring in regulation, which is the question I asked while I was putting together that report, doesn't that further stifle the activities of the press? So rather than regulating or putting some kind of control, what can we do? Some believe that already these platforms have their own inbuilt regulatory policies, and that the government already has certain laws. They are like libel laws that you can use. Can't we, look for other means that would not stifle the efforts of the press rather than regulating these platforms?
So, the truth is, right, the truth still stands. Where there is no law, there is no sin. So we cannot exactly say that the body should not be regulated. But then it is now to talk about this chokehold, like Shewa said, that every single thing, it now looks as if every year there's a new constitution to support the level of corruption that is, because there's no telling how deep and dark this thing runs. And that's why you see people scared of the cameras, even more scared of the camera than they are of the guns, because they know what is happening behind the scenes. So it's like every single time people are coming up with new laws, new constitutions, new regulations that it looked like it didn't even exist in the first place. That's what we should be talking about.
Yeah, and just to speak to the fear of the security operatives and every other person to the camera, and I'm thinking one of the ways I'll propose we can actually get past that is having digitized journalists. And, technology is taking over. And just as we say, we've had to contend with citizen journalists and even content creators. How good and skilled are the journalists we have these days with technology, with a lot of these apps, with a lot of these gadgets that we can use to capture real life and real time events without even having to bring out the big box that rolls and records all our events. Now that's that. I want to quickly speak to the regulation Blessing spoke about. For Nigeria, for example, one of the major role of the Nigeria Broadcast Commission is to protect the same media. And I think if I can put it out there, it's not really doing so much for that. Rather than protect that same media, it's kind of exposing it to a lot of attacks and other form of attacks, if I can put it in that way. Because I feel before any person, either private, even government, can set up a media station, there should be some regulations. There should be some laws that you must be able to keep to, whether it's personal, whether you're openly partisan to a particular party, or you have your own bias, or you have your own support to whoever it is. It must not affect this free flow of information, because the people have a right to be informed. And that should be the basis where this NBC should be working in from. That's why I feel that they're not really working for the media, they're working against the media. Because if the NBC has set those rules, those laws down, not just about you can't project more than this. No, before you can even set up a media firm in the first place, you must sign this, that you must have free, fair, objective reportage. Those things are very, very important, irrespective of where your support lies, irrespective of where your party politics is going to, irrespective of your gender, irrespective of your tribe. All these things should be stated, and the NBC should be able to support that. Okay. Then, if the NBC can support internally, then you will see all these things coming in. If a journalist understands that he or she has the backing, for example, I was back where I was before, I noticed there was a fracas between a police officer trying to manhandle someone. And I, intervened with my ID card. I was beaten black and blue. And my phone was even broken. No, that was not the painful part. The painful part was that I went back to my media station and I reported this and I said I would like to do a story on this. Do you know the story went down? They didn't do anything about it. Why? Because the place is owned by some. So there's a lot of. But if these things are already in law, if these things are already there, the NBC can serve as a support system for the media. All right. It can be a pillar.
I want to believe that the NBC actually is a pillar for for media, but there's a whole lot more that the NBC needs to do. And by NBC, we're talking about the Nigeria Broadcasting Corporation. Anyway, that's a conversation for another day. And again, still talking about press freedom, we have to tread softly when even talking about the NBC, so that the NBC doesn't come for us. Let's remember that. Now, as we wrap this up, I quickly want to say, I got this line from Spider-Man movie, and I was hoping I would use it one day, and this is the best time to use it. I know. With great freedom comes great responsibility. So we're talking about press freedom now. It means that there also are responsibilities expected from journalists. Yes. We have less than a minute. So very quickly, Shewa, what do you think should be the ultimate responsibilities from journalists? And Niyi, you two, in 30 seconds each, please.
All right, so I was going to interrupt Niyi when he was talking about, rights to information for journalists. So as journalists, as much as we have rights to information, I think we should not just, as we receive it, then we get it out. We need to also, try to understand the mood in the country. I was at a conference with a security personnel, and it said that journalists must understand the mood of the country before giving out particular information. And then I said that they were forced to, sometimes sieve the contents that they give to journalists when it comes to stories about, let's say, an attack between the army and terrorists. So they like to, try to, turn down the report so that there's not a lot of agitation on the street, that people do not raise fear. They do not raise fears among Nigerian citizens. So in cases like that, you just need to understand the tone and the mood, and then try to, regulate your stories. As much as we are going to, we want to give out the truth, you should also try to, understand the mood in the country and not to use your own story to aggravate fears among Nigerians.
I'll just start by saying this. There's a reason why all these big social media platforms have content moderators, and that's because they are trying to see what people get used to or what people see, and it is important because what people digest is what they, of course, act on. And as journalists, it's important for us to checkmate put out facts, accurate and
Okay.
objective reportage.
All right, thank you so
you
much
so
for that.
much, guys.
Unfortunately, because of our time, we'll not be able to go extensively. I would have loved to say something as well, but we're out of time. But thank you so much, Adesewa and Niyi, for joining us.
Thank you for having us.
Regardless of everything, we're proud to be journalists, and that's all we
Yeah.
can say. Thank you once again.